Good evening. All right, so it is with great pride and honor that I introduce to you Father Harry Hagan, a Benedictine monk from St. Meinrad, as have been many of our speakers in this Benedictine Lent series that we've been doing. I was, how do I put this? The only class that I took of Father Harry Hagan's, unfortunately, was an elective in Latin. It was fine, it was good, it's just I was a horrible student. So, I apologize for that and my lack of preparation. But he's known for his scripture scholarship, and I was unable to take his course, especially in the Old Testament. Father Harry is a very brilliant man, very well versed in the Old Testament and kind of poetry, that kind of literary expertise. And so we're very excited to have him here to speak to us about St. Benedict speaking about love. And so I'd like to give him a round of applause as we welcome him.
Yes, I would have liked to have had him in class again. I think I must have been on sabbatical. That I would have had him for prophets. This evening I want to talk about Saint Benedict, and I want to talk about his rule. And I think you will find we're going to look at pieces. I teach scripture, so I'm used to looking at a text and talking about the text and talking about what I'm seeing in the text. And so, for me at least, it's important that I bring something for you to look at so that we can read it together and talk about it together. And as we go, if people have questions, I would be happy to have you ask a question. So just wave me down and I'll stop and we'll see what if I can answer it or not. I may or may not be. We have to set a little context first, and we need a date, and the date is 313. And it's that date that Constantine, who has become the Holy Roman Emperor, he issues a decree making Christianity a legitimate religion. And so, from the time of Jesus up to 313, Christianity was not a legitimate religion, and as time went on, if you wanted to be a heroic Christian, you just had to say, I'm a Christian, and they would grab you and throw you to a lion, and you would become a martyr and a heroic Christian. So it was pretty simple. After 313, you could stand up and say, I'm a Christian, and they would say, oh yeah, get out of my way. And so people began looking for a way to be a heroic Christian. And as it turned out, lots of people started going out into the Egyptian desert to be hermits. They're both men and women in the Egyptian desert where they went out, they wanted to seek God, and they wanted to pray always. This was kind of that was really in their head. They wanted to pray always. They were trying to figure out a way to pray always. And they wanted to kind of be taken up into the mystery of God. And the great Egyptian hermit was a fellow named Anthony the Great. There was another fellow as well, a fellow named Pachomius, kind of a strange name, Pachomius. And he goes to the desert, but instead of being a hermit that is all by himself with no one else around, he gathers people to himself. And pretty soon there's a bunch of guys that have come to join him and to seek God with him together. And his sister comes and he sets her up in a monastery right next to his, and lots of women come out to join her. Now, if you're a hermit, you can do kind of whatever you want to do. You can, pray when you want and eat when you want and get up when you want or stay up all night if you want and so forth. But when you live with a group of people, a bunch of people or even a small group of people like a family, everybody kind of has to know what the plan is and when the meals are and how it's going to work. And so Pachomius writes a rule that is a kind of a list of things to get everybody on the same page. So right now we're in the 300s. St. Benedict, who writes a rule for monks, he doesn't come along until the early 500s, and typically they say he writes his rule around 530. We don't know exactly, but around that time. There was this idea that Benedict kind of cooked all of this up, out of his own head, and it was something brand new. But in fact, that was not true. It had been going on for 200 years, as we've been hearing. And various people, St. Basil had written a bunch of things, and St. Augustine wrote a bunch of things, and a fellow named John Cassian wrote a bunch of things. And then another fellow who we don't really know what his name was, we call him the Master, wrote a big long rule as well. And so when St. Benedict sits down to write his rule, he has all of these different things on his table. And really, he ends up kind of picking and choosing, and as it turns out, he is somebody with a lot of good sense, and so he picks some very interesting and helpful things and puts it together in a rule. That was in 500, and we're in 2000s, and so for 1500 years, people have been using this rule to guide them. Not everything in the rule, some of it kind of belongs in 500, but there is lots of good sense here, not just for monks, but I think you will find that as we read this, that there's lots of good sense in here for you as well. So let's look at the opening part here. It says the prologue on the top of page 1 there. And it says, "Listen, O my son, to the instructions of the teacher." So this book is something to teach you. You're supposed to learn something from it. "And bring near the ear of your heart." I've always liked that it's like your heart has an ear. And so you want to hear not just physically, really, but with your whole person, with your mind and your heart. You want to listen to this world with everything. "Gladly accept and carry out in full the counsel of a loving Father." The word loving here, and we're interested in love this evening, as Father said. So this is St. Benedict in love. So there's lots of things, but we'll have to do several things in order to get to love. This first instance of love, the Latin word is pius. And of course our English word pious comes from that. But in Latin it has a very interesting notion. Pius means someone who is devoted both to their religion and to their family. Someone who takes care of, and the founder of Rome, the mythical founder of Rome, Aeneas, is called Pius because he takes care of his family and he is very devoted to his religion. And so here we have that word describing this person, the teacher, who is also a father, and he is going to be someone who is devoted to, in this case, as the opening says, to the Son. But maybe we need to think of that more broadly and think of disciple or student. "Listen, O my student, to the instruction of the teacher. O my child, to the counsel of a loving Father, so that you may return by the labor of obedience." Obedience is an important word in the Rule of Benedict, and the Latin root of obedience is audire, like audio, and it means, audire means to hear. And so obedience is about hearing. If you can hear what is really being said, then you know what to do about that. And so the very first word of the rule here is listen. And so Benedict is trying to get us to really focus and to listen with the ear of our heart to this loving Father so that we can go to God. To return by the labor of obedience to the one from whom you have backed away through the idleness of disobedience. Now, love is one of the main features of the Rule of Benedict, and I'm going to jump down to where it says, chapter 4, the tools of good works. Benedict has a list of tools that the monks should use in the workshop of the abbey. And they should work with these tools in order to grow in grace and to grow in the life of God. And the very first one is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. So the love of God is the very first thing, but then of course that's followed then to love your neighbor as yourself. And so he sets kind of as the foundation stones of this life, love. Love of God, and then love of neighbor. But there's a third love there too, the love your neighbor as yourself, which means you have to love yourself. I once knew a psychiatrist, Dr. O'Connor, and he was at St. Martin, and I was showing him around the library, and we were looking at some calligraphy that one of the monks had done. And we saw this very saying there, and it had great big letters, love the Lord your God, and then in small letters, with all your heart, soul, mind, and so forth. And then love your neighbor, and then real small, as yourself. And Dr. O'Connor said, I would like to have one of those, except I would like to have as yourself be great big, because I have spent my life trying to get people to love themselves. And I hate to say it, but I've met a couple of people that I hope they wouldn't love me the way in which they love themselves. They didn't really seem to love themselves. All three of these loves, they go together. The love of God and the love of neighbor as self. So this kind of vertical piece and this horizontal piece, and they're not really two different things, but to love God, we have to love our neighbor, and by loving our neighbor, we love God. And so the holding of this divine and human piece together, this is what Jesus does himself. This is what he holds together in his own person, because he is true God and truly one like us, human like us. And so in his very person, he holds together this love of God and love of neighbor. And we're supposed to be like Christ. And in some sense, this is the basic call of Christianity, to love God and neighbor as ourselves, to be Christ-like. Also in these tools of good works, it goes on, right toward the end, there's one that you're not to love, and what you're not to love is conflict. There are some people that love conflict. They seem like, I don't know, they're always kind of throwing a wrench in the machine. But according to St. Benedict, you're not to love conflict. And then you're to revere the seniors and to love the juniors. And here I think we begin to see a piece of love. That love is involved with revering, with holding people in honor, with respecting people. Here he calls on the young monks to revere the old monks. But the old monks are to love the young monks. That's to go together. And it seems to me you could change it around and say that the old monks are to revere, respect the young, and the young are to love the old. Yes. Then 72, to pray for your enemies for the love of Christ. That was a hard one, isn't it? That's from Matthew, Sermon on the Mount, to love your enemies. And it seems to me that it is only the love of Christ that for at least a lot of us that makes that possible. Loving your enemies really does demand that we be like Christ. And then to return peace to anyone with whom you have quarreled before the sun sets.
That's an old piece in the monastic tradition. One of the early amas of the desert, one of the women who went out to be a hermit, Ama Syncletica, she says if you are angry, you have to deal with that before the sun goes down. And that's what we get here, this idea that you can't hold on to anger. If you hold on to anger, it just eats you up. It doesn't really do anybody else any good. It just eats you up, and it blocks you from loving other people. And finally, it says never to despair in God's mercy. The word mercy is an interesting word. It's particularly interesting in the Hebrew. The Hebrew word for mercy is rechamim. And that word is the plural of rechem. And rechem is the word in Hebrew for womb. The plural then is rechamim, wombs, which is the word for mercy, because mercy is womb emotion. It is the emotion that a mother has for her child. It is, absolute. It's just there. It's there just because it's there because this child is a child of her womb, and so that emotion that binds them together that's what the Hebrews call womb emotion, mercy. And so in Hebrew it would say, never despair of God's wombs, never despair of God's mercy. Go back up, that second paragraph there, which is the end of the prologue. In the prologue, Benedict calls people to really rise up and to follow Christ. And then in this last paragraph, he says, therefore we must establish a school of the Lord's service. A school of the Lord's service. Now, sometimes that's taken as a kind of a definition of a monastery. But it strikes me that it would be a good definition of a parish. But a parish is a school of the Lord's service where we learn how to serve God by worshiping God, but also serve God by serving each other. Anyway, we must establish a school of the Lord's service. As for its method of instruction, we hope to establish nothing harsh or burdensome, but if reason and fairness dictate being a little stricter to correct faults or to preserve love, do not then and there become daunted by fear and run from the way of salvation. So this is not a school where you can just do anything, although he's not setting out to make it just, hard, just so it's hard. But if we need to correct faults or preserve charity. This is all about love, to preserve love, that we want to do that. There is no beginning except a narrow beginning. And then, but when you have advanced in conversatio is a word, it's really a Latin word that in monastic circles people begin to, and it means way of life. And monks take a vow of conversatio, which means they take a vow to become more and more a monk every day. In the same way that people who get married, it's not that that it all happens on the wedding day. But if you're married, you know that, it's something that has to keep growing, and that you have to keep working at, and that you're trying to become more and more married, day by day, little by little, sometimes moving backwards, but still trying to keep it going forward, so that there is this turning that makes you more and more, whatever it is. To be a Christian is, again, the word conversatio means to turn with over and over. And so we're as Christians, we're constantly turning more and more with each other. We're turning more and more toward God. So here it's saying, but when you have advanced in conversatio and in faith, you will run with your heart enlarged and with the unspeakable sweetness of love on the way of God's command. So this is to bring you to a place where you're keeping God's commands, because by doing that you are full of joy. That's what enlarged heart means. That you have this big heart, and it's not that you're kind of barely making your way along the way of God's commands, but it's taken hold of you in such a way that you run. And you run with your heart enlarged and with the unspeakable sweetness of love. And so this is the goal. This is what Benedict sets out that people are to be shooting for, that they're to be going toward, is this running with heart enlarged and with the unspeakable sweetness of love. Okay, now to get to that, he sets up in chapter 7, on page 2, he has a ladder of humility. Humility is one of those virtues that, I don't know, sometimes I think people think that being humble means being somebody's doormat, or letting people walk over you, that makes you humble. And really, this is not an easy chapter, but for Benedict, humility is living in the truth. Humility is saying what is true about yourself. And so to the extent that I have weaknesses and am sinful, I have to admit that. But to the extent that I have strengths and am good at various things, to be honest, I need to say that that's true about myself. Being humble doesn't mean pretending. Being humble doesn't mean kind of saying what is true is not true. Being humble means facing the truth about yourself. And to be humble, you have to be really strong. Because most of us have a hard time with the truth about ourselves. We pretend, or we don't want to look, or whatever. But Benedict is calling people to be honest about who I really am, and to show who you really are. And he says if you do that, then therefore when he has ascended all these steps of humility, the monk will soon arrive at that love which, when perfect, casts out fear. This is the goal of being honest. This is the goal of being true, is coming to the love that has no fear, the love that can even cast out fear, so that you are not afraid to show who you really are, and you're not afraid of other people and who they really are, but that you're able to love with the love that casts out fear. Through this love, everything which he, the monk, was keeping before out of dread, he will begin to keep without effort, as though naturally and from habit. So this life that seemed hard, this person who has arrived at this love that casts out fear will be able to do that because that is really who they have become. He will no longer he will no longer do it out of fear of hell, but for the love of Christ. That we will become people who love because of the love of Christ. Because we have become like Christ. We have become deep and imbued with this love of Christ. And he adds to that good habit and delight and virtue. But the main thing, though, is the love of Christ. Now, I want to turn to chapter 64, which is over on page 3 there. It's the title is The Appointment of the Abbot. And so you would ask yourself, now what does this have to do with anything? What do I care about how they appoint abbots? But it's really in this chapter that we see Benedict's
ideal of what it means to be a human being. That he describes what he thinks a kind of a full, rich human being would be. And so he says, once appointed, let the abbot always bear in mind what kind of burden he has accepted and to whom he will have to render an account of his stewardship. So the abbot has been elected to, as the head of this monastery, but he can't do just what he wants to do. For the one thing, he is a steward. That is, he is over something, but it's not really his. And he's going to have to tell somebody else what he has done with this stewardship. And then this next line, which is very interesting, and he should know that it is more important for him to be for others than to be over them. Sometimes when people get in charge, it kind of goes to their head, and they think that they can order everybody around and kind of that everybody's supposed to do just what they think they should do. But Benedict has a very different idea that the person in charge is there to be for people, not to be over them. There is, there needs to be some authority, but the authority is there to serve. To serve. He must therefore be learned in the divine law. That means the Bible. So he must know the scriptures so that he knows how to bring forth things new and old. Sometimes people, they come to St. Minor, they see me in this, they think, we've gone back to the Middle Ages. That this is a person that is a kind of a museum. That St. Minor is a museum where we pretend that we're living 500 or 1,000 years ago. But that's not a tradition. The tradition is handing over life. A tradition, one of my favorite definitions of tradition is supposed to be from Pablo Picasso, the modern painter, who kind of strange looking things. And Picasso said, tradition is not wearing your grandfather's hat. Tradition is having a baby. Tradition is handing over life. Tradition is doing what you need to do in this period in order to hold on to the values and the reality that has gone before you. And so when I wear this, I remind myself that I belong to a tradition that has a past and that I come from someplace. But it also reminds me that I have to add to the tradition, that I have to make the tradition continue to live, that I have to somehow bring new life to this. And to do that, the abbot and everybody else in the monastery has to know how to bring from the scriptures both what is old, what we know, and what has been tried and true, but also what is new. And will open up new ways to love, new ways to be alive. Then it says, excuse me, he is to be chaste, temperate, and merciful. And I'm still struggling with why those three things are put together. To be chaste demands a certain discipline and a certain ability to restrain oneself, which is what temperance is about. At the same time, we have to be merciful, I think particularly to ourselves sometimes. Some people they're too hard on themselves. But anyway, I'm still working on getting those three together. And he should always exalt mercy over judgment, which is a very interesting idea. He takes it from the letter of St. James. But Benedict, he belonged to the Roman culture, and in Rome, one of their great strengths was law. They were people of law. They knew how to make laws and to have order. And so Benedict belongs to this tradition, this great legal tradition.
And yet here he picks this piece from the letter of James to exalt mercy over judgment. And then he goes on to say, so that he himself may find mercy. Because the truth is, all of us, in some way, all of us need mercy. If we just have justice, we're doomed. And so this mercy and justice, it's not that there is no justice. That's not what he's saying. But that this mercy, this womb of God has to take precedence over judgment so that he himself may find mercy. Let him hate their evil ways and love the brothers. This is out of the Gospels too, to hate the sin but love the person. Now, when making corrections, let him act prudently. There are a number of these words that have to do with balance. Not too much this, not too much that. He must let him act prudently and not go to excess, lest in his excessive desire to scrape off the rust, he breaks the pot. That some people, they see a little bit of the rust on the pot, and they begin to scrub, and they scrub, and they scrub, and they scrub through and ruin the pot. It's not just pots that you can do that to. You can do that to people as well. If you try to make them do absolutely, you're going to break the person. And he goes on to say, let him always keep his own fragility before his eyes, and let him remember that the bruised reed must not be broken. A lot of people are bruised reeds. All of us have some bruise for the most part. That's true for all of us in some way. And Benedict realizes that. He realizes that people are fragile, that the abbot is fragile, and that we have to handle each other with care. By saying this, we are not saying that he should permit evil ways to grow up. So no, that's not what he's saying. But he should cut them off with prudence, there that word is again, and love, as he sees best for each person, just as we have already said. The love that fits each person. Every person needs something a little bit different. You can't love them all exactly the same or the same way. And Benedict realizes that, which is interesting. He's getting a group of people together. And when you get a group of people together, on the one hand, you want them to kind of, come together and to be alike and to be for the group and be willing to sacrifice to the group. And to do things that, maybe you don't want to do, but the group needs this done, and so, you're doing this. The abbot called and said, would you like to be novice master? I said, no. He said, think about it. I was novice master for 12 years. So sometimes you're doing things for the group, but Benedict realizes as well is that in order to take care of the group, you have to take care of each individual person, and to love that person as is best for them. Back in chapter 2, which I don't have here this evening, but he talks also about the abbot. And one of the most striking things, actually, in that chapter, for me at least, is that he says that the abbot should conform himself to each person. Now, the abbot is supposed to be kind of the grand person. You would think, that the monk should conform himself to the abbot. But no, it says that the abbot should conform himself to the person. And I'm sure those of you who are parents and have children know that, each one is different, and you have to be a parent to this one as this one needs, and to that one the way in which that one needs. And so that this process of loving, it's not one size fits all. That we have to be able to love in different ways depending on the person that is in front of us. This next sentence, let him strive to be loved rather than feared. Machiavelli, who lives 1,000 years later, says you should strive to be feared rather than loved. That if you make people afraid, they will do what you want. And there's some terrible truth in that. But that's not what Benedict says. He says you should strive to be loved rather than feared. When fear is the name of the game, everyone is pretending. No one is showing who they really are. Then he says, the abbot must not be stormy or anxious, not extreme or headstrong, not jealous or ever suspicious. Otherwise, he will never have rest. In his commands, whether they concern God or the world, he should have foresight and consideration, and he should be discerning and moderate. There's that word again. In the work he assigns, and then on the next page, bearing in mind the discretion of holy Jacob when he said, if I drive my flocks too hard, they will all die in one day. Discretion is the ability to figure out where the middle is. Discretion is not too much, but it's not too little. And the middle is always kind of moving. To be generous, excuse me, to be generous means you don't want to be stingy. On the other hand, you don't want to be foolhardy and, just kind of throw your money away. So being generous is giving money, but prudently. And to some people, you decide that, being generous means giving them a little bit. And to other people, being generous is giving more. But what does it mean to be generous? It means to figure out where that middle is. And that's discretion. And then he says in the next line there, therefore drawing on this and other witnesses to discretion, the mother of virtues. That this ability to figure out where the middle is, that's what the virtuous life is about. Is not too much, not too little, but finding what today is the middle. Let him so temper all things that both the strong have something to desire and the weak need not run away. So there we have Benedict setting up this kind of ideal person in which kind of a basic part of that is this discretion, this prudence, this middleness, this balance. And all of that is to serve love. A love that is humble, that is a love that is real. Back on page 2, we have some different places where we see this at work. In chapter 31, we have the manager of the monastery, the business person in the monastery, the one who kind of takes care of the pieces. And he says, let there be chosen from the community a manager for the monastery who is wise and mature in character, temperate, there's that middle word, not forever hungry, not arrogant, not troubled nor hurtful, not late nor wasteful. So this person who is trustworthy, the word wise there is an important kind of piece. A wise person can find the middle. Rather, fearing God, he is to be like a father to the whole community. So that this person is to be like a parent. He is to take care of people because he's in charge of the things that, the material things of the monastery, the food, the clothes, things that people need, the equipment of the monastery. And this person, they could be very controlling. And they can be very manipulative. They can jerk people around. But Benedict wants them to be like a parent to the whole community, to be someone who takes care of, who is there for people and not just over people. Then he talks about the weekly kitchen servers. And there the idea is that by serving each other, we grow, we gain a reward, a heavenly reward. But look at the last part, the very last two words there, that there is, we gain a greater love. By serving each other, we learn what it means to love, and by serving each other, we make that love concrete. And so the monks are to be about serving each other. Then in chapter 36, he talks about the sick. And the opening words are very instructive. He says, before all and above all, they must take care of the sick in order to serve them truly as Christ. For he himself said, I was sick and you visited me. The sick are a problem. They're always sick. You can't just go visit them for 10 minutes and then forget them. They need to eat, and they also need to be taken care of, and all kinds of things. And so Benedict reminds us that the sick among us are Christ among us, and that Christ has called us to take care of the sick the way in which we want to take care of Christ himself. And a community that can't take care of its sick is not a community. And I don't want to get. I don't know how the healthcare thing should work. I'm totally innocent of that. But I know this out of the rule, that unless we can figure that out, we're not going to be a national community. So it is important for us to figure that out, whatever that means. In chapter 53, he talks about the reception of guests. Let all the guests at their arrival be received as Christ. Guests are a problem too. These are people who show up at all hours of the day, and they haven't had enough to eat, and they have other kinds of things that, they maybe are not well, and so forth like that, and it would be easy. And in some of the other monastic rules, the master locks them away so that they can't get out. But Benedict is very open and hospitable to the guest. He receives them as Christ. He sees the guest who comes as Christ coming. And so he wants to take care of the guest, and he wants to learn from the guest as well. And so let fitting honor be shown to all, especially to the household of faith and to travelers. And then at the top of page 3, therefore when a guest is announced, let him be met by the superior or by the brothers with every service required by love. So what are we to do for the guest? We are to do everything that love requires us to do. Everything love requires us, every way in which love requires us to serve them. And so to pray with them so that they may be joined in peace. So the sick are to be received as Christ. The guests are to be received as Christ. The other group that Benedict identifies with Christ is the abbot. Because the abbot can be a problem. He can ask you to do something you don't want to do. And so Benedict reminds us that the abbot is also to be treated as Christ in the community. This love that Benedict is talking about comes to, in a sense, a climax in chapter 72, which is chapter 73 is the last chapter, and there Benedict calls his rule a little rule for beginners. It's a place to begin. And here in chapter 72, he kind of sums up the rule, and he talks about the good zeal, and he says, I'm on the back page there, just as there is an evil zeal of bitterness which separates from God and leads to hell, so there is a good zeal which separates from evil ways and leads to God and everlasting life. So the zeal, this kind of hot desire, it can be bad. He recognizes that it can be bad, and the bitter zeal of the evil zeal of bitterness. And you probably met some people that they were bitter, and that's that's going to take you in the wrong direction. He instead wants this good zeal in verse 3, let the monks therefore practice this zeal with the warmest love. So he's looking for a love that's not, not just, cold or, you say you love, but he's looking for a love that really takes hold of the person. I don't, some people are more kind of expressive and emotional, and some people are more restrained, and that's just different kinds of personalities in a way. But some people that are very quiet, there is within them this kind of firmness of love, and that's what Benedict is looking for. And people who have that, he says, that is, let them strive to be the first to show each other honor. And this idea of respect, that's where love begins, by respecting people, by acknowledging that this other person is indeed a person that I need to respect. They may be different than me in lots of ways, and we may disagree in lots of ways. But fundamentally, I must honor them. I must respect them. Then the next line is one of the most famous lines in the Rule of Benedict. It says, let them bear most patiently with one another's weaknesses, whether of body or character. The word patient is from the Latin word patior, which means to suffer. And so to be patient is to suffer. My mother says patience is a virtue. Find it if you can, sometimes in a woman, never in a man. Sometimes, though, the only thing that you can do is suffer. And here Benedict is talking about, let's see, where am I? Let them bear most patiently with one another's weaknesses, whether of body or character. The body refers to those who are sick. And so that there's a suffering and sometimes in dealing with people that are sick, although there can be a joy as well. The other is character. And if you live with other people, I live with a bunch of other people, or if you work with other people, they're not all exactly the way in which you would have them. And the other reality is that you are not always what they would have. Sometimes it becomes important to say something. When you do this, this is the way I feel, or something like that. And sometimes it depends, certainly with people that are being formed, young people, we're all being formed in some way, and so being told the truth so that we can be humble can be important. But it's also true that sometimes you can say something to somebody, but that's who they are. And that's the person they are. And surely spouses know this. That the other person, and I'm sure you say something sometimes because you just can't stand it, but and it might help a little bit. But basically, you're going to have to bear patiently with each other's weaknesses, yes, both body and also character. There's a great truth in that. The way in which you do that is by loving. The next one says, this is really for men perhaps, although I don't know, maybe women, but it says, let them devote themselves to the rivalry of obedience to one another. Men love to compete. And so Benedict gives them something to compete about, so that they can say that I'm the first one.
I am more obedient to you than you to me. This obedience to one another. If we're going to compete, let us compete with that. And then no one should follow what he judges useful for himself, but what is better for the other person. And so we're doing really what is better for the other person. The only thing I would say here is sometimes I am the other person. But sometimes I'm the person that needs something. And we all like to be, or at least lots of us like to be self-sufficient. And we don't like people doing things for us. And so we pretend that we don't need anything. When really, in this instance, we are the other person. We are the person that needs somebody to do something for us. And at that point, we need to recognize that and let the other person do for us what needs to be done and quit pretending. But for some people that's hard. There's a person or two I know that you do something nice for them, then they have to do some, turn around and do something immediately for you so that it's even. Certainly in a community, it all works out. If I do my part and they do their part, it all evens out there. And then 8, let them devote themselves to the chaste love of brothers. Love, but the love that is with, there are limits. And there are, that love does not do whatever you want to, but love is to do whatever Christ wants you to do. And when you do that, then there's the chaste love of brothers. In the next verse, it says, in love, let them fear God, which is kind of strange because in chapter 7, he talked about the love that casts out fear, and here we are fearing God, or maybe we need to say stand in awe of God. Somehow this comes from love. In love, let them stand in awe of God. And then let them love their abbot, who can be a problem. Or let them love their spouse, who can be a problem. Or their children, or their parents, who can be a problem. With a sincere and humble love. The word sincere in Latin, it has to do with whole and integral. And the word love, humble, has to do with reality, not pretend or false, but a real love. And so let them love their abbot, spouse, parent, child, with a sincere and humble love. And let them prefer nothing whatever to Christ, so that Christ is before everything. That phrase, prefer nothing whatever to, comes up 3 times in the rule. It comes up in chapter 4. Let them prefer nothing to the love of Christ. And it comes up in chapter 43 where it says, let them prefer nothing to the work of God. The work of God is a technical term in the Rule of Benedict. It means the prayer that they do together. It is the place where they make their service for God, their work of God. But it's also this place, which we are in the workplace of God, where God works on us as we pray. And when we do that, we prefer nothing to Christ. Christ who is divine, and therefore the love of God, and Christ who is human, and so the love of neighbor as ourselves, and we are called to be like Christ, to hold together the love of God with the love of neighbor as ourselves. And that's probably enough for me to say. Maybe I've already taken up all the time. So
We've got a couple minutes.
Does anyone have a question? Or is it time to go? Yes.
What size groups was he dealing with to make this rule?
Now, he talks about having what are called deaneries, which are groups of 10. So
It could be, a lot of monasteries are not too big, 20 or 30 people. In St. Mander, we're around 80, which is kind of a larger monastery. So, but I think there are pieces here, I hope, that I've shown you this evening, that whether you're a monastery or a family or a working group, there's lots of kind of good sense here that works in whatever size the group is. Yes.
What would you say?
No, go ahead.
What would you say is the greatest obstacle to love in the modern age?
Modern age. Well, I don't know. I think it's probably just people generally. I don't know that things have changed so much. I don't know, self-centeredness, this ability, love has to do with the relationship, and it's making these connections. And there's something in us that pushes us out to make those connections, but it's hard to kind of give all of that. I got to laugh so much.
Both Father Dan and I obviously have been schooled in the spirituality of Saint Benedict, but could you say something about the oblates? Because you speak out of the monastic community, you spoke well to us tonight, but there are groups of lay people that reflect and pray and seek the wisdom of the rule of Benedict for their married life, their single life, their student life, etc.
So there's a group that's connected to St. Mander, they don't live in St. Mander, called Oblates, people who have made a commitment to study the rule of Benedict and to see how they can make that a part of their life. As a married person, a single person, as people who are busy with lots of different things, or sometimes people, and also people who are retired and are looking for a kind of a deeper spiritual life. Part of that is tied into the daily prayer amongst this work of God. So morning prayer and evening prayer, and then praying the scriptures. And so there is a rather elaborate, or I don't want to make it sound too complicated, but there is a very nicely ordered program for those people, and there are over 1,300 oblates who have made that kind of commitment, which they renew year by year, to really enter more deeply into the life of Christ through this Benedictine way. Although I always say a lot of the Benedictine way is just kind of what the church calls everybody to do. The monks, we get up at a certain hour and we do psalms in this way and so forth. So there's some things that are very kind of particular, but the goal is really the goal that all of us as Christians have. I think that's probably enough.
One line that says we love God with our heart and our soul and strength. How do you, this is a dumb question. What is your soul? How do you love with your soul? Is that equated with the mind?
The Hebrew word there is nephesh. And the word nephesh in Hebrew originally means neck.
Okay.
That's helpful still. But the word, everybody comes on St. Blaise Day to get their throat blessed. And the reason is because without your throat, you're dead. And in Hebrew, that word comes to represent not just your neck, but really your life, your kind of being, yourself. It gets translated into Greek as soul. And so, in Greek it's soul, but in Hebrew, so it's with your whole nephesh, your whole self, your whole being is what that word, at least in the Hebrew, is about.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Father Harry. Just a reminder, if anybody would like to help stick around afterwards for cleanup, I think we still have that going on in the kitchen, right, Nikki?
Yeah, Becky did a lot of it, but there might still be a little bit.
Okay, yeah, so if anyone wants to head back to the Legacy Hall and help us with cleanup, should be quick. Next week, we are continuing the series. However, this is the one and only weekend that we do not have a Benedictine speaking. You are stuck with me next week. But as Father Ron mentioned, we were trained in Benedictine spirituality and for a priesthood. So we'll be talking about St. Benedict in the home, kind of carrying on some of the themes that Father Harry talked about tonight, how do we bring that into our family life. With that then, Father Harry, would you like to give us your blessing as we conclude?
The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace. Thanks be to God.